Okay. Hello everyone and welcome again to my audio-visual channel. My name is Gabriela Handal. I'm a draftsman and the host of the show you're about to watch, a conversation about art, where I'm doing long-term research on the meaning of art and beauty. If you'd like to support my channel, liking, leaving a comment, and sharing this video is incredibly helpful, and so is subscribing. Other support links are in the caption, show notes, or description, whatever you call it. Today we have episode 96, and my guest is artist Aidan Barker-Hill. So Aidan, welcome. Please tell our listeners and viewers who you are and what you do.
All right, so I guess, according to the IRS, I am a teacher and not necessarily a painter. It's been a little while since I made any money off of painting, but I'm an artist and instructor, art instructor living in Brooklyn. So been in New York for a little while, and that is where my entire sort of career is centered around. Whatever it is exists as of now.
Okay.
Oh, I can't remember. Was there another facet to the to the question? I can't remember specifically what you asked.
No, just whatever you consider to be pertinent about, you and your work, or your whatever you consider your career. And actually, it's interesting that you, because you mentioned that you haven't made money directly, specifically from your work in a little while. I was actually thinking about that very thing, or something very closely related to that, which is the expression of living off of one's art. And the reason is that, that expression is thrown around all the time. And I kind of feel as if it isn't defined, because I remember having, I myself have said it a lot of times, but I can't say that I have specified at least what it means for myself. But what I understand from it is that living off of my art, what I understand from that is that I make drawings and I sell the drawings, and then this money from the drawings is enough to pay rent or something. So what do you think about that expression? And do you think what do you think of when you think of the expression? And do you think your current routine, like all the teaching that you're doing, do you think it fits into the expression?
Yeah, I think there's the fantasy of being able to make money solely off of my art, and it's something that I definitely would like to have. But it's also, I recognize that even a lot of artists I really love and respect don't necessarily get lucky enough to do that. So I think it's just a reality that you probably won't be able to make that much money, because it's a pretty niche industry to be a part of. It's ultimately kind of this luxury product thing as far as actually generating money goes. And so I'm perfectly happy with having a job or something that's not necessarily strictly related to me making my own paintings. As long as I still get to make, as long as I still get to make the paintings a few days a week, that's sort of as much as I could really ever ask for.
Mm-hmm.
It's already a fairly hedonistic thing to be doing, and so the fact that I have 3 days a week now where I get to do that, I feel very fortunate that that's the case. Because a lot of my friends from school that have nothing to do with art, people that I met as a child before I ever really got into it, maybe they get 1 or 2 days a week where they get to do that. So I just feel fortunate that I have as much time as I do to work on painting. And who knows, maybe someday it'll make some money, but it's all right if that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you? But besides having about 3 days a week to paint, typically, hopefully consistently, every week, do you also try to show the work, or sell the work through the social media, or showing it in galleries and this type of stuff, or are you hyper focused on teaching?
Oh, I would really like to show the work. I don't know if I'm allowed to necessarily talk about, but I have something, it's my first, I've been in 1 or 2 group shows at a gallery in New York called Arcadia, who I think is a fantastic gallery.
Oh, yeah, I saw that on your Instagram. Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's not that I've never shown it before, although I haven't shown anything with Arcadia for quite a while. I have something that's coming up next year that, again, I don't know if I'm necessarily allowed to say who or when, but eventually that'll happen. And I really would like to show it to more people. I mean, Instagram is the closest I get to that because it's not like I have a huge following, but it is fun getting to put it out there and get responses from people. So I would like to be more engaged with that, but I think I have. Maybe it's a social problem, maybe it's a motivation problem, but I have not been good enough about establishing professional connections and trying to, hustle your way into getting. I think getting a gallery. I think that's probably a bad attitude towards it. I haven't put enough effort into befriending and making myself a part of the community where you maybe would be able to show work. I've just, for the most part, I just kind of sit around in my apartment and make paintings and just hope for the best, which is probably not the best strategy if one is to be serious about displaying work to the public. So I'd like more of that in the future, and it's something that I definitely need to improve at. It's by no means a function of shyness or lack of interest. It just sort of hasn't happened. And as far as teaching goes, I mean, I love teaching. It's a ton of fun. If I decided to be a professional teacher for the rest of my life, I would be very happy with that.
Okay.
I mean, I've reflected on this before. I really like painting. In some ways, I feel like I might be a better teacher than I am a painter. Like I'll sometimes look at friends of mine that I went to school with where I just feel sort of in awe of how good they are at coming up with ideas to paint and finding a way to make it engaging to other people. And I feel like for me, I have a much easier time communicating when I'm talking to people about how to paint as opposed to making my own work. So I really like doing both. I mean, it's not like a begrudging sort of day job. It's something that I do really enjoy getting to do, and I feel super lucky that the Academy is willing to work with me on putting the classes out that I have.
Okay. Yeah, that is really cool that you're a faculty at the New York Academy of Art. Did you also study there?
Yeah. So
Nice.
I graduated from the MFA program in 2018. So most
Nice.
of my kind of art and social connections in the city come from the Academy, and I'm a big New York Academy evangelist. I had a wonderful experience there, and
Nice.
I still really like the school.
Yeah, for sure. No, I graduated in 2015, and also I greatly enjoyed my experiences. The 2 years there were really, really great. And yeah, very enjoyable, and just it's so fecund with just, I don't know, motivation and all the study, and like being able to look at your classmates' work and what they're doing and how the work changes in the 2 years and how your own work changes in the 2 years, and like, searching for something like this type of stuff, and all the teachers are also artists. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually recognized you from one of my instructors in undergrad. You're definitely familiar with him. One of my favorite artists, Richard Morris, who had done a drawing of you with like underlighting. Cool. And when I first studied with Richard, he had only recently done that drawing, and so I remember seeing that years ago. So it's funny talking to you now.
Cool.
But yeah, I mean, that's how I found out about the Academy. It was via Richard, who
nice.
Was, I think, a peer of yours while you were there.
Yeah, he graduated in 2014, and then I was like the next year. Yeah, Richard is, that's cool. One of the things that I like about what the school purports to teach is that it has like it teaches like a solid traditional sort of foundation, but then what the teachers try to do is to get the students to kind of talk under modern circumstances, something like that. I don't remember what it is right now, like it's contemporary discourse and traditional training, contemporary discourse, something like that, right?
I'm not sure what their motto is at the moment,
it's something like
but
that.
I definitely can say that the school has moved into a more contemporary direction in recent years, which is cool because I think even probably 10 years ago it had a much more, I guess what I'd consider like a classical realist slant in some ways. I think it had a lot of connections to the sort of atelier network in the US. And not to say that it doesn't now, but it definitely does have a slightly wider range of instructors and students that are interested in going. So yeah, I mean, I think as far as MFA programs, it's one of the best in the country, maybe the world, who knows. I really enjoyed my experience there, though. I think, yeah, to what you were saying, it is a great fusion of people who are both really invested in technical training and also curious about how to differentiate themselves from everyone else at the school, which is kind of an inherent issue that pops up in a lot of schools with really, really strong technical training. Is you end up self-selecting for a population of people that end up all kind of making really similar work, which isn't inherently an issue, but I think it's a little bit more interesting when there's more personality expressed in the general student body.
Yeah. I don't know how much. I don't know how I feel about the alleged contemporary flavored seasoning that's kind of being added to the stuff that the school is that kind of stuff that the school is teaching. But at the same time, I agree otherwise, because I feel like the if we're because it feels like if it's not the academy, then the only other stuff that's available is just atelier type stuff, like
Right.
Florence Academy, just GCA, whatever. It's like if a person wants if a person wants to be an artist and what they want to depict is realistic type work, the figure, landscape, portraiture, whatever it is, and you want to get actual be actually taught about the anatomy of the portrait, the anatomy of the figure, how to draw landscape, perspective, and this type of stuff. Those are the places that you have available to study that stuff. And I agree with the part that I think you alluded to, which is that because that's also the impression that I have, that the work that comes out of those places. It might be that I'm not very well versed in that type of visual language, but to me it tends to all look very, very similar. And I don't think it's an issue of the subject matter. I think it's kind of an issue of the way that it's being taught, in sort of, because it's so rigid in the steps of making something, or formulaic. I'm not sure. I don't know where I kind of perceive a flaw in the flaw that results in everything looking so similar. But I don't think it's the teaching of traditional techniques. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's somewhere else, because in the past, when we're talking about like the pre-Raphaelites and these people, the Salon and stuff, they were being taught the same kind of traditional type things that are the solid foundation of really good work, and they were perfectly well differentiated. So clearly that is not the problem. And it's like they were much more restrained than we are now, I would say. And the work that came out of them was just amazing,
I think a lot of schools from the past, because we end up just sort of filtering whoever is the most historically relevant artist from each period, it sort of looks like there's a lot of variety. If you look into a lot of the salon work happening in the 19th century, it definitely went through a few different stylistic periods, and the most famous practitioner is the one we remember. But, for every Ang and David and Bouguereau, there were a lot of clones quite similar to them making very similar work. So I think it is it's the price you pay for a really streamlined technical education, as you are far more likely to end up succumbing to this sort of very safe conformity, which I don't think is inherently a bad idea, but it's just sort of a trade-off. Like, in a school where they don't give you a lot of technical training, a lot of people won't have the widest variety of tools for expressing themselves. And in a school where you have a really rigid system, I think people are too scared to try things. And to some extent, I think part of the issue may have something to do with, not that I'm trying to pick a fight with anyone, because most of the artists that I really like to look at, and a lot of the artists that I really look up to, are people from that atelier tradition, because I'm quite interested in that kind of realism. But I think the difficulty with working from imagination and the insistence on observational and very direct sort of mimetic qualities in the work end up kind of hamstringing it to a certain extent. When you look at a lot of those artists from the past that have a little bit more variety and spice in their work, there was a lot more of a willingness to work from imagination or from something that wasn't a strict kind of simulacrum of reality. So, that's my 2 cents on that. That said, I think all of the people from GCA and Florence are probably some of the best painters in the world.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not trying to poke at anyone either necessarily, because I for sure greatly respect the value of that. But when you were talking about how in the salon there was a lot of clone-like people, it made me think of rather kind of like the Pareto distribution. I don't know if you know about that. Maybe
thing.
Yeah, the thing. So, for example, unfortunately, the only example that I can think of is with money, and it's like, and only because I've heard and only because I've heard it explained. But I think it's applicable. I think it's applicable to like all kinds of stuff in nature, and it makes a lot of sense that it would also be applicable to art, because it's like a lot of people can get all the traditional training you want, but they're not all going to be as good, or not all of their styles are going to be as they're not going to demand the same amount of attention as the other ones. It's like that makes no sense that it would be the case, because everyone is different, and some people have different levels of stuff in the desire that they have for doing things. Some people are more exploratory, some people are just not, and then that's the way that it is. So then like with the Pareto distribution, it talks about how if you have like a group of people, there's always like a small group of people that accumulate like either resources or talent or whatever. And then within that smaller group of people, there's an even smaller group of people that have way more talent or money or whatever than the rest of the small group of people. And then it gets smaller and smaller like that. And that repeats in nature just everywhere. And it applies to like our modern quote unquote life also, like I was saying with money. It's like the same thing. So I think there might be some of that with this whole, like, you know, if we talk about the like environment kind of atelier traditional type training, you know, what do you think about that?
I mean, I agree with you to a certain extent. I think art, visual art especially, is one of the kind of interesting subjects in that I don't think, or I have the kind of deeply held belief that most people are individual enough that they could find something interesting and unique to contribute and express about themselves. Sure. And it's not like music or writing where, you know, in order to write a good novel or write a good song, there's a certain amount of like absolutely necessary communicative sort of grammar in order to do that. And visual art doesn't really have that in the same sense. You can make a really beautiful kind of abstract thing theoretically with no knowledge of how any of that works. And so by the same token, I have the sense that if people are sort of taught and encouraged to kind of tap into their own sort of personal expression, and guided in, well, I guess what I would deem the right way, that there's a lot of potential for almost anyone to make something interesting and cool. And so maybe to a certain extent it's the training. To some extent, I just feel like it might just be the lack of encouragement to really explore that kind of thing. Because, I mean, the funny thing is I'm friends with a lot of people that go to these much more rigid schools, and they are all really like wonderful, interesting people that have their own opinions and ideas. And it's just the sort of thing I love to see, you know, come out in the art as much as possible. Luca Spinoni, who you just recently had on, I think is a fantastic example of that. I love his work. It's definitely really influenced by his training at GCA, and he is very much his own person and the kind of art that he's making. Sure. So I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but you know, I even though I think there's probably truth to that Pareto distribution, I do also feel like visual art is kind of special in the sense that, you know, I think anyone can kind of make something interesting potentially.
Sure. No, I mean, I certainly agree with that. But I mean, at the same time, the whole point of being different is that our interests are also different. And it's like not everyone is interested in making works of art or being involved with art at all, or music or writing or, you know, science or STEM or being a teacher or whatever. So like that's kind of like the point of the individuality, the individuation between all of humans, that our interests are different. Therefore different people will be different amounts of people will be interested in different amounts of things. And then so like if you have your group of artists, for example, they can't all be super interesting.
No, that's true.
So like not only can all of them not make super interesting, like equally interesting things, the viewers or like the crowd that's gonna like receive the work, they can't all be interested in all the work that in the same way that in the work that's being made, and that is because we're all different.
No, I do agree with that, and I also agree with the sense that there is a kind of X factor that some people have that you can't really account for. And when you look at their work and the way they do it, not in a self-deprecating way, but I'll look at it and be like, man, I don't think I could ever do that. That's so incredible.
Yeah.
So I do take your point. Yeah, it definitely, you can't necessarily account for why the cards, you know, fall where they do, or chips. I don't know, mixed metaphor.
Yeah, no, because for example, like, I know that I should probably learn about color and perspective and landscape, but I also can't say that I'm interested in any of those things, you know?
Mm.
So like, so I mean, I'm just very biased in favor of drawing the figure and drawing specifically the portrait, like from the shoulder up.
Right.
So it's like I have kind of I mean, of course it can be argued that that's cool, but then it can be argued that it's also a flaw in the work, because then I'm not as adept at drawing the other things. So then that's going to result in, it's like that already shaves down a lot who is going to be interested in the work, or how much I can kind of like develop, quote unquote, the work, or make it look in a certain way. But yeah, okay. Okay, let me think about time here for a second. All right. So, Mr. Barker-Hill, what is art in your opinion?
It's funny. I wrote down a little document that had my definition for it, and then I forgot to save it, so now I'm
Oh
going to
no.
wing it anyways. So art, I would kind of broadly categorize it as any kind of human expression to communicate one's feelings, either to oneself or to anyone else. So pretty broad definition, but yeah, I think that's how I would qualify it. I think any definition more rigid than that tends to be exclusionary to a kind of draconian extent. But then I also do think that, there's a human sort of desire to want to define it and put some kind of boundaries on it, because if there's, if everything is art, then sort of nothing is. So
Right.
I guess the tightest stricture I'd be willing to put around it is just that I think it has to be made by a sort of conscious being, and it needs to be intended to communicate one's feelings either to oneself or to others. Probably in most cases both, but I guess there could be instances where somebody is making art and has zero interest in showing anyone else. But I think most people that make art want it to exist so that other people can get involved.
Okay. All right. So, just now you said something about communicating the feelings either to a viewer or to oneself.
Yeah, like I think that it's a great way to process your feelings and to, I guess that's what self-expression is. When I'm talking about self-expression, it is that, like you can do self-expression, and oftentimes it is to express it to other humans, but it doesn't have to be, Sometimes you just make things for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the part about kind of using the work sort of to try to digest something, something that you're mulling over in your head makes a lot of sense to me. Just because you're sitting there kind of thinking about the thing while you're working on it. But so when it comes to a viewer looking at the work, do you think it matters that the viewer picks up exactly on what the artist intends the work to mean, or I mean, does that not matter as long as the viewer feels something?
No, I mean the viewer doesn't even necessarily have to feel anything at all for it to be art, because I think that kind of gets into if it is good art or bad art. I guess if I was defining it, it would be, does it satisfactorily fulfill my definition, and to what extent would determine if it's good or bad. So I think something can be art even if it's not very effective and people aren't responding to it and aren't understanding what was intended. But no, I mean, at a certain point, I don't think it's important if people pick up exactly what it is that you're trying to say, because this happens all the time with like music, where there are songs that I really like and I don't know if I know precisely what the artist meant when they wrote it, but I get something out of it.
Actually, that makes me. Yeah, I think music is a really good example as a comparison, because I mean, I like music in a bunch of other languages, and I have no idea what they're saying. But because the music is good, it's still effective at summoning feelings. Good. Like, oh my god, I'm enjoying this in me as like the listener. So.
Right.
So I guess I wonder what you meant, or rather, if you can elaborate when you mentioned the good or bad art, because I do think it's important that it's good, especially if one is trying to communicate something visually, and like the object that one is making is exclusively visual. Like you don't get words, you don't get sounds, you don't get touch, this type of stuff. You only get to show visually to the viewer something. So like if they're not gonna like get the message, quote unquote, at least they can, it's like in order for the work to kind of like touch the viewer in a way, so like the imagery has to be effective or good, or there has to be something about it that can reach the viewer in that way, if that's the only conduit that you have, your eyes. So yeah,
Right.
What do you think about that?
I don't know if I'm necessarily. I think I may have forgotten some of the question at the beginning of it, but if I'm taking it correctly, if it's qualified as good or bad, it's one of those problems where I think that ultimately people have to act as it's kind of like free will. It's that idea that I don't really think that people functionally have that much free will, but I feel like people need to act as if they think they do. In the same way, when it comes to defining what is good and bad art, I don't think you really can define what's good and what's bad, because everyone has different opinions, and to exert your own opinion on someone else and require it of them would be immoral in some sense. But I think that it's important for artists to act as if they know what good and bad is, because that's sort of what drives them and gives them the conviction to put so much time into making what it is that they make. So I guess I'm a bit of like a relativist on that. Like I don't think you really can say what good or bad art is, just whether or not it broadly classifies as art.
Okay, I don't understand why though. So would you mind explaining it again or more?
Yeah, sure. Like why you can't?
Why you think that you can't say whether art is good or bad?
I mean, I can say whether or not it is in my opinion, but I think broadly the kind of interesting and important question that usually gets brought up with relation to topics like beauty and art is if you can actually have any kind of objective assertion related to it,
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that, like in other subjects, you can say whether or not, well, I guess that doesn't work either. The example I was going to say wasn't very effective. Sorry, could you? So you're saying you're not totally sure why I feel like you can't assert if something is good or bad?
Yes, because I mean,
I guess it's just everyone's taste is different. You know what I mean? Like there's some kinds of music that I can't really account for why I just don't like it, and there's other kinds of music that I don't think is particularly objectively good, but for some reason it just really speaks to me. I just really get into it, and it feels like it's a little ridiculous when you're trying to tell someone, well, you have to like this thing. I had a girlfriend that was really into Bach and Mozart, and she explained all of the reasons why it's amazing, and I understood it intellectually, but I still don't really listen to Bach in my spare time. You know what I mean? Like I can understand why she was into it. I don't think it was bad, but ultimately I listen to music that's probably in the broader sort of cultural zeitgeist a lot worse, but I like it. And it's the same thing with art. I think I got a lot more kind of hung up on trying to ground things in some degree of objectivity when I was younger. But the more time that passes, the more I kind of realize that you really can't define any of those things. Sometimes people just like what they like, and there's no accounting for it. And so you can't really assign any kind of actual value to it, even if you need to act like that in order to make your own work.
Mm-hmm.
Like ultimately I like realism. I think it's really cool. It's the kind of thing that I really want to do. It is an enormous amount of work, and it takes an enormous amount of time to make the kind of work that I do. And so even though I ultimately think, well, there's no inherent kind of importance or superiority or quality to it than any other kind of work, I don't act that way, because I do spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to make sure that I get all the proportions right and the values end up reflecting something that looks like light, even though those are totally unnecessary to fulfill my own definition of what art is. It's more just that I feel like I don't really have any kind of philosophical ground to stand on if I start trying to make prescriptions.
Okay. Would you go more into this whole thing about how we don't have free will?
Oh, sure. I mean, I just feel like whether or not you believe in a divine creator, or if you believe in things like, biology and the setting that you're raised in, either way, you're given, not that literally it doesn't exist, but you're given far less free will than I think most people would be comfortable with the idea of. But ultimately, in order for society to function, people need to act as if they do have free will and make decisions in accordance with that. I mean, I would say I'm not a particularly religious person, and so for me, I feel like, the upbringing that I had and the genes that my parents gave me determined the majority of, where I am in the world and how I react to things. So ultimately, I have some small amount of free will, but not that much.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Because
does that make sense?
yeah, it makes. It makes some degree of sense because I understand kind of like the physical, biological limitations. I understand that part, and I also understand that there would be several, many decisions that would be kind of a consequence of those physical and biological limitations, but.
I mean,
Yes.
assigning what you feel, it's like the nature versus nurture kind of thing, where it's really hard to assign any kind of like numerical value to, well, how much is the outcome because of your own free will, and how much of it is the circumstances in which you were made. And I am not a scientist, and I don't think even a scientist could necessarily. I guess I, I didn't want to drag things into that. I was just using it as an example of, like, I think that's kind of one of the best examples of an instance in which I don't believe, I don't believe I can assign a value judgment to art, even if I act like I can. It was more, just sort of an analog for explaining that.
Okay.
I wasn't necessarily saying that I feel like the free will thing, you're destined to be the artist that you are or not. Of course, there are enough small interactions or exertions of free will that you can, shape your life to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Yeah, okay. Well, it's just that, when you were talking about, when I asked you to develop more the thing about good and bad art, I was thinking about how when the longer that one looks at art, the longer amount of not one work of art, but like, if you have like 40 years of your life and you've been looking at art different art consistently, or whatever it is that likes to call itself art, whatever is under the category, you build an image bank, right? And
right.
Within that image bank, similarly to the Pareto thing that we were talking about, there are going to be things that are obviously better than others. Whether because you like them or whether some of them are actually good or a combination of both, there's going to be things that you can recognize are made by people that knew what they were doing more than others. And the reason I know that part in particular is because for whatever reason, I'm able to recognize amateur drawings from a person that knows how to draw more versus somebody that's just getting started for whatever reason. Right. I don't know why. Because I say that I don't know why because I'm not sure that I'd be able to explain to you what the difference is, but I can recognize them with my eyeballs. So I think that part of, or I'm speculating that part of the reason for which it is so common to say that good and bad art is relative is because one person has not and cannot see all of the art in the world or history. So then I think that if we were able to see, if a few people or somebody, or like, I don't know, if you and I, for example, for the sake of the discussion that we're having, were able to see all of the art that has existed and all of the art that currently exists that is being made like up to this point, I think that we would be able to find things that are obviously good and things that are obviously bad and things that are clearly not art. So I think it's a matter of some information kind of being missing from the judgment of good and bad art,
I don't think it necessarily is that, because I feel like you cannot separate yourself from the culture and the time in which you are raised, and that has such a significant impact on how you perceive art. In the same way where, I don't know, if you took a Vermeer painting and just plopped it in the middle of, like, 14th century Indonesia, I don't know if they'd care at all about that. So it's sort of like it depends on how you're qualifying what is good and bad, and when you are doing that, you're still a product of your upbringing and what you are. And so in that respect, I feel like from the get-go that makes it ends up coloring your view of how things look and their quality. And then even as far as I'm of the mind that I prefer art that is made in the kind of representational mode for whatever reason. And I guess I could justify why I think that that's interesting or good. I think that everyone having a similar visual experience means that a work of art that effectively mimics that is automatically going to be more visually stimulating. But I recognize that that's my opinion. So there are plenty of people for whom, and I'm sure this is the kind of thing that you would have seen plenty of in New York and the kind of contemporary art world, who would argue that that kind of training can, to a certain extent, spoil one's own sort of innate ability to express. And while I don't necessarily believe that, there are people that do, and who am I to deny them their feelings on that? So as far as if we're defining, if it's good or bad, and you were kind of using the example of somebody who is just starting or more or less trained, there are some people for whom that would be a plus.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Just a second. All right.
It's a boringly safe thing. I'm not staking a very strong claim here.
That's fine. All right, goddammit, wait. All right, Mr. Barker-Hill, what is beauty in your opinion?
What is beauty? So I did look up, because I ignored a lot of my art history classes because I was just so focused on wanting to learn how to paint well that I didn't engage enough with the academic side of things. So I wish I had paid more attention for the purpose of this conversation. I did go and look up Kant's sort of explanation of it and his separation of the beautiful and the sublime, and I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think the kind of, again, boring answer to this is that beauty is a set of kind of arbitrary characteristics that we culturally assign to things that we think of as being pleasing. So within our own culture, and I am not at all saying that I co-sign or agree with this, I think when people say beautiful, kind of colloquially, a lot of what they're referring to is, something like pleasing, calming. Oftentimes I feel like those traits are being associated with like femininity or softness in some case. Again, I'm not saying that I feel that, but I think usually when people say beautiful colloquially, it kind of refers to that. Like I remember, being raised as a kid, if you were as a man called beautiful, people might sort of raise an eyebrow at that. And I think every culture, every time ends up having their own kind of definition as far as what they think beauty is. For me personally, I don't know. I think it's this kind of ineffable, like slightly transcendent thing, like independent of culture, independent of upbringing. It's just a feeling that people get in response to something, and that feeling I think could broadly be categorized as some kind of like pleasing or attractive quality, but I think it sort of eludes definition. I think it's really hard to put a specific definition on it, and the more that you try to put a specific definition, the more it kind of squirms and becomes difficult to actually fully ground. So again, it's a little bit nebulous of me, and it's always slightly more fun when somebody is staking a really specific claim. But my genuine thought is that it kind of eludes definition, and to attempt to define it would be to kind of ruin what it is. So it's, I don't know, it's a feeling that I think everyone has. It's just hard to say specifically what that is.
Would you explain what colloquially means, please?
So it colloquially would be like if you were just talking to somebody that you didn't know at all and they called something beautiful. So they haven't given you a definition of beauty. You are just hearing them say beautiful. And so within the context of being in like 21st century America, we have a definition of things, and then we have sort of like the colloquial sense of what those mean. And there are certain concepts that probably have a lot more philosophical depth to them, but you're probably not in a conversation going to interrogate someone on their specific definition of beauty. You'll just kind of accept what it is that they mean, whether or not it's fully agreed upon. And so I guess when I say colloquially, If I hear someone say beautiful, I'm assuming it associates with some of the characteristics I listed, like, pleasing, soft, attractive, oftentimes sort of feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Which, those are all very like loaded ideas. Like having to qualify what femininity is does kind of deconstruct and break that apart. But like I said, if I'm just talking to a stranger at a party, I'm probably not going to do all of that. And if they refer to something as beautiful, I'm just kind of saying like, all right, well, that's probably what they mean.
All right. So I looked up colloquial, and it says characteristics of or appropriate to the spoken language or to writing that seeks the effect of speech. Informal.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't understand what that means.
It's like it's like the informal definition. You know what I mean? It's like if somebody.
But I mean, from the example that you're giving me, it sounds. I mean, not that it sounds like. What I understand is that one person is using a word and the other one is just assuming some amalgamation of what it means.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's how. I mean, not to get like again too like, Plato philosophical about it. I think that's how like language generally works, and there are certain words that are a little bit more slippery and a little bit more difficult than others. So it's like, with like Plato's example of the chair. If somebody says chair, you probably know what they're referring to, and that's the kind of term that's a little bit easier to assume what it is that they're talking about. But, you could go down and interrogate, well, what exactly do they mean by chair? Is it just something to sit on? Is a couch a chair? If somebody says, look at that chair over there, and they're pointing at a couch, do you know what they're talking about? Or do you have to make some amount of sort of assumption related to, like, the technicalities of the definition? I guess so. That's what I mean by, like, colloquial is. And, also when I'm talking about colloquial, it's different now than it would have colloquially been 200 years ago, or, if you were Amish as opposed to living in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I was offering that up primarily as like, well, there is that kind of colloquial definition, and there's the more like personal definition, which my sort of semi-non-answer is I feel like you can't define it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
it's just too subjective.
Well, it's just that, one of the reasons for which I started the podcast is that I am kind of tired and frustrated of the eye is in the I was going to say it backwards. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I was going to say beauty is in the eye of whatever. I was going to say eye is in the beauty, whatever. Anyway, so...
I know what you mean.
I was going to say it backwards. I'm kind of tired of that because it frustrates me how it doesn't lead anywhere. And I think the reason for which that is so prevalent and it's so easy to just say that or something like it is because it is way more difficult to actually try to think what beauty or art is, for that matter. Because neither one is easy to think, to try to understand what it is. And also, and it's, of course it's easier to be like, oh, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's like, you sound so interesting, and it's like, oh my God, that sounds so deep, and this type of stuff, and it kind of allows for certain things. It just like...
Should they not be allowed?
I don't know if they should be allowed or not. I don't know that.
Why wouldn't they?
I don't know.
Why should they not be allowed?
I don't know why they shouldn't be allowed. It depends on what the thing is. So what I'm trying to get to is, where I'm trying to go is that beauty being difficult to define or being almost impossible to define or whatever it is, like that difficulty doesn't mean that it should just be given up on. Not only that, but I also think that it is much more all right, just give me a second. I think it is a lot more nature than nurture than we think, because if we're thinking about, for example, male typical traits or female typical traits that are considered to be attractive or even beautiful or whatever you want to call it, it is, those things are cross-cultural and across time. So I personally don't care for things that are divisive, meaning that, oh no, it's individual and it's like kind of like assigned by cultural or whatever. Because the thing about culture is that it's been made, it's like the culture, it's like a lot of the culture that, the one that I know are very, it's just like, it's brand new. We, meaning, right. like each, humans each individual, you and me and every person is kind of like an emulsion of something that's very new because, I don't know how old you are, but you're young. I'm 40 years old and I'm 41 years old and that is not old at all. That is very new. But at the same time, the systems of which we are made, meaning the body, the psychology, the brain, the biological way in which we function is old as hell, like millions of years old. So then so then it's like, who do you think is going to have the prevalence? And so like, why do you think it's been working for so long? Because it works. And so
Right.
I think there's so to me, the fact that I was able to talk about that for so long in regards to beauty is much more gratifying, and I feel like I'm on a path to something that is much more important, and that not more important necessarily, but that, important, and that carries more weight and meaning than being like, beauty, I was going to do it again. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That just doesn't work for me,
this
because
gets into so many interesting topics. I think it's an amazing mission, and it's an amazing idea to kind of pit yourself against. There are a few different things that you brought up that I think are super interesting, as far as like, to what extent is there an innate natural sense of something? To what extent is it influenced by culture? And of course, it depends on the subject. So when it comes to things like you were talking about, like standards of attraction between men and women, and of course, I feel like there's a sort of biological quality to that. However, I think one of the really important distinctions when we're talking about something like art is, when you're talking about attractiveness, this gets to the core of humans, but also life generally, which is like reproduction. Like everything in our body and brain is geared towards trying to incentivize us towards reproducing. Right. So like by its very nature, of course, there's going to be a lot of influence there. But one of the things that's interesting about art is now, I guess somebody could make the argument that art is in some respects like part of a mating display, and it's all about, eventually it ties back to reproduction in some complicated sense. And maybe there's some truth to that, but I think, art as a kind of self-expression, a sort of almost like leisurely thing, feels somewhat independent of that need to reproduce. So when it comes to its function in society, I think it ends up being a lot less clear-cut than something like that, just by nature of the fact that it is like kind of a leisure activity. It's in the sense that, like, of course there was an explosion of art in the Renaissance because there was a lot more prosperity and there was a lot more ability to invest resources in that. Sorry, bit of a tangent, but anyway, so I think as far as determining, is there any kind of underlying human nature to it, because I could definitely understand the interest in trying to derive that, because there are things for which our biology does predispose us to things. So it stands to reason that there might be some equivalent of that within art. But I would generally say I just don't think that there is, because as soon as you start trying to define and categorize those things, I think it ends up leaving a lot of people out in a way that, in my opinion, cuts against the purpose and the function of art, which, like I mentioned, was self-expression. And to in any way attempt to sort of police somebody's self-expression, I think that starts to be, maybe not immoral, but I guess it could be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well,
so I suppose it depends on what you're. I mean, not to try to turn it all back on having you give me all of the same definitions that you feel, but it really does depend on what you think art is defined as and what its purpose is. And I guess from there you can start to draw conclusions about whether or not something can be objectively good or bad, and if you can make sort of a ranked idea of it from best to worst across all time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think we forget that a lot of people just aren't interested in art. I
don't think that's true. They might not be interested in painting, but they're certainly interested in music. They're certainly interested in movies, TV shows, all kinds of things on, the internet. The way that things are designed are extremely artistic in a lot of ways. So even if the exact mode to which it's expressed changes, I think there is a very innate interest in it.
I mean, yes, but I mean, I guess I was talking in both senses of not just making art, but also making art, but also kind of like appreciating the work. And I mean, the way that a person the way that one person appreciates a work of art, like you were saying, like a movie or whatever, is not going to be the same as another person appreciates it, because it's like one person might want to just see like cars crashing and explosions and all the CGI and stuff, but then another person might be interested in like this, might be interested in like more like a more high in art value, I guess. Like, you know, if you're looking at a Tarantino thing where he planned all of this stuff out, it's different kinds of like leisure seeking, like you were talking about. And I mean, I think it's still valid to say that some people will prefer to go outside and sit in the sun or read than to do. I mean, so that's what I mentioned earlier, that everyone's interests are different, and everybody's impetus, everyone's desire to do something or express themselves, the way in which they express themselves is different. And that's kind of what makes, I think, humans, one of the things that makes humans so very interesting, because that's why not everyone is a science teacher in high school. That's why not everyone is teaching in university, or that's why not everyone is a scientist, because then then everyone is doing the same thing. And so like the point of being different is that everybody is doing different things and looking for different things or wants to learn different things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would feel that would, under that kind of criteria, it would stand to reason that then beauty really is in the eye of the beholder, right? For that very reason, I thought about this before when it comes to like animation. So this is one of those things that I remember being really picky about when I was a child. So this is like before I had any kind of formal training, before I feel like I had anyone tell me what good or bad was. Of course, there are things telling you that within culture, but I remember being really interested in a lot of the, like, I guess more like traditionally very realistic cartoons, not in the sense that like I was really into like Dragon Ball Z and all the Marvel stuff, where like the proportions of the people felt more similar to the real world, or maybe some kind of like Renaissance painting thing. I remember really not liking things like SpongeBob, which were much more this kind of like lowbrow cartoon style, and just having this like general repulsion to stuff that looked that way. And I was also a very I was a real, hater ass bitch as a kid. Like I just really enjoyed, and I still do enjoy critiquing things. It's just kind of how I am generally. But at a certain point, I have to kind of give it up. Like, well, if SpongeBob were drawn in the style that like Dragon Ball Z is, that would be a very different and probably not very well matched show. In the same way that if you're trying to communicate something like whatever Basquiat or Cy Twombly or really anyone is trying to do, I don't feel like you can necessarily create a rubric that defines what is effective or ineffective as far as that goes, because everyone has a different thing that they're trying to express. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Sure. Okay. So, all right, I'm going to start to close it out.
All right.
Mr. Barker-Hill, so is there anything else you want to add? Is there anything you would like to plug? Is there anything you're excited about? Any projects you have coming up?
Sure. I mean, I guess as far as something to add, I think this is very fun to talk about. I think there is a sort of complacency with a lot of sort of art intelligentsia on not being totally willing to contend with everything from their most like basic building blocks. So I think this is a really fun thing to go over and discuss. As far as something that I'm doing, so I've got a show coming up, a 2-person show at some point next year. I'll again, I have to ask the gallery when I'm allowed to tell people about that, or if it's, how official it is. But there's something coming up. I'm excited about that. I haven't had a lot of opportunities to show my work, so I'm really pumped about that. Most relevant recent thing is I just did a course with this South American, or are they Spanish? They're Spanish speaking. I can't remember where they're from. Called Domestica. So I have a figure instructional course, and I'm really happy with how it came out. It's an extremely affordable. I don't know if it's gone up in price. It was $9 for the first couple weeks of its release. It's under $20 for sure. It's like 8.5 hours of instructional content. I put a lot of effort into it. I think it's really good. So I if I'm going to plug something, it's that. I also have a couple classes coming up at the New York Academy. So like, my portraiting classes, and then I have a couple of videos with them as well. So all that stuff all that and more is in my Instagram bio. But no, that's about it.
All right.
That's all I got.
Okay. All right.
All right,
Well,
cool. Well, it was lovely talking. Thank you for having me on.
of course. Likewise. Thank you very much for your patience and for agreeing to talk to me today. Thank you, Aidan. Yes, for joining me, for your time, your words, and your thoughts. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Feel free to let Aidan and I know what you think of this conversation in the comments, and also leave any additional questions. I encourage you again to like this video and share it with anyone you consider relevant, as it is immensely helpful to my channel, and so is your subscription. If you want to support Aidan, myself, and this podcast, the links will be in the show notes. Thank you very much, and see you next time, everyone. Bye.